Hey guys, nice to see you. Welcome back. We're reading My Side of the Mountain. This isn't going to show up. We're reading My Side of the Mountain, page 54 through 68. If you can do Bookshare, please log into Bookshare. Follow along as I read. It will help you become a better reader. I got some videos, I got a slideshow going on. If you guys like this big screen, let me know and I will stop doing the slideshow the whole time. I'll click out of it as I can. But I would, if I was a student, I would prefer the the slideshow on the whole time. But let me know what you guys prefer, and I will accommodate. So maybe you like to see my big face as I'm reading, and or maybe you like the slideshow on the whole time and you like my face smaller. I did notice that the YouTube videos are hard to hear uh, in the slideshow, so I only put in one today. It's kind of hard to hear, so let me know if you even hear anything. So that being said, let's go. So this video is not too long. How a door came to me. One morning before the wood peewees were up, and remember wood peewees were those birds that we learned about last time. I was smoking a mess of fish I'd caught in the stream. When I caught more than I could eat, I'd bone them, put them on a rack of sticks, and slowly smoke them until they dried out. This was the best way to preserve extra food. However, if you try it, remember to use a hardwood. Hickory is the best. I tried pine on the first batch and ruined them with black tarry smoke. Was very silent. Then came a scream. I jumped into my tree. Presently, I had enough nerve to look out. Baron Weasel, I said in astonishment. I was sure it was the same weasel I had met in the trap. He was on the boulder in front of the hemlock, bad, batting the ferns with his front feet and rearing and staring at me. Now you stay right there, I said. Of course, he flipped and came off the rock like a jet stream. He was at the door before I could stop him and lopping around my feet like a bouncing ball. You look glad all over, Baron. I hope all that frisking means joy, I said, with my pants leg in his teeth, tugged it, and then rippled softly back to the boulder. He went down a small hole. He popped up again, bit a fern nearby, and ran around the boulder, crept out to look for him. No weasel. I poked a stick in the hole at the base of the rock, trying to provoke him. I felt a little jumpy, so that when a shot rang out through the woods, I leapt a foot in the air and dove into my hole. A cricket chirped. A catbird scratched the leaves. And then this is the first thing I looked up. I wasn't sure what a catbird was, so apparently this is a catbird, just kind of a generic looking little bird. I waited one enormous minute later. A dark form ran onto the meadow. It stumbled and fell. So when they say shot, he means he heard like a gunshot ring out. I had the impression that it was a deer. Without waiting to consider what I might be running towards, I burst to the edge of the meadow. No one was in sight. I ran into the grass. There lay a dead deer, and if you remember, he really wanted a deer from the last chapter. With all my strength, I started to drag the heavy animal into the woods. I then hurried to my tree, gathered up the hemlock boughs on my bed, rushed back, and threw them over the carcass. I stuck a few ferns in them so they would look as if they were growing there, and ran back to camp breathless. Hurriedly, put out the fire, covered it with dirt, hid my smoking rack in the spring, grabbed Frightful, and got in my tree. And so, guys, remember he's smoking the meat to save it. Smoke the meat, you make like a rack out of sticks, and then the campfire smoke dries it out so it saves. Okay, so it's called smoking. Someone was poaching, and he might be along in a minute to collect his prize. The shot had come from the side of the mountain, and I figured I had about 4 minutes to clean up before the poacher arrived. And poaching means killing animals illegally out of season or without a license. Then, when I was hidden and ready, Frightful started her cry of hunger. And the next picture, I put in a picture. Frightful's getting a little older. This is a picture of a young falcon, maybe what Frightful is starting to look like. I had not fed her yet that morning. Oh, how was I going to explain to her the awful need to be quiet? How did a mother falcon warn her young of danger? I took her in my hands and stroked her stomach. She fought me, and then she lay still in my hand, her feet up, her eyes bright. She stiffened and dropped. I kept on stroking her. She was hypnotized. I would stop for a few moments. She would lie still, then pop to her feet. I was sure this wasn't what her mother did to keep her quiet, but it worked. Bushes cracked, leaves scuttled, and a man with a rifle came into the meadow. I could just see his head and shoulders. He looked around and banged towards the hemlock forest. I crawled up on my bed and stroked the hungry Frightful. I couldn't see the man from my bed, but I could hear him. I heard him come to the tree. I could see his boots. He stopped by the ashes of the fire and then went on. I could see my heart. I could see my heart lift my sweater. I was terrified. I stayed on the bed all morning, telling the fierce little bundle of feathers in my hand that there was deer meat in store for her and she would just wait with me. Way down the other side of the mountain, I heard another shot. I sure hoped that deer dropped on the poacher's toes and that he would now go home. At noon, I went to my prize. Frightful sat beside me as I skinned and quartered it. She ate deer until she was misshapen. I put a video here. This is how you clean a deer. First, you hang it up and you do a field dressing. So you cut open its stomach and then you pull out its guts. Okay, and that's called field dressing. Then the next step right here is skinning. So you cut it from its butt here down to its chest, and then you can like pull off the skin. And then the next thing is quartering, which you cut the legs off, one right at the joint in the hip, one, two, and then three, four, and then you cut just pieces of meat. You cut the back strap off and some pieces of meat off of that part. I didn't make any notes as to how long it took me to do all the work that was required to get the deer ready for smoking and the hide scraped and ready for canning, but it was many, many days. However, when I sat down to a venison steak, that was a meal. All it was, all it was venison. I wrote this on a piece of birch bark. I think I grew an inch on venison. Frightful and I went to the meadow when the meal was done, and I flopped in the grass. The stars came up. The ground smelled sweet. I closed my eyes. I heard pip, pop, pop, pop. And I think, man, what kind of thing in the wild makes that noise? That's a weird noise. Who's making that noise? I said sleepily to Frightful. She ruffled her feathers. I listened. Pop, peep. I rolled over and stuck my face to the grass. Something gleamed beneath me, and in the fading light, I could see the earthworms coming out of its holes. So there's some earthworms. Nearby, another one arose, and there was a pop. Little bubbles of air snapped as these voiceless animals of the earth came to the surface. That got me to smiling. I was glad to know this about earthworms. I don't know why, but this seems like one of the nicest things I had learned in the woods. That earthworms, lowly, confined to the darkness of the earth, could make just a little stir in the world. And I put a video too. I tried to find a video of them making noise because I was interested. Again, let's see. I put in a timestamp here. See if I can find it. Okay. And again, I know that you guys can't really hear this that loud, but let's see. And I can kind of hear them a little bit too. It's definitely not very loud, but you can kind of hear them like making little pops. All right. Next chapter, in which Frightful learns her ABCs. Free time was spent scraping the fur off the deer hide to get it ready for tanning. So to make the hide, once you pull off the skin here, you have to scrape off all that fur so you can make leather. This much I knew. In order for to tan hide, it had to be steeped in tannic acid. There's tannic acid in the woods and oak trees, but it took me several weeks to figure out how to get it. You need a lot of oak chips and water. Water and oak give off tannic acid. My problem was not oak or water, but getting a vessel big enough to put the deer hide in. Remember, he has no bowls or anything, so he has to figure out what to do. Coming home from the stream one night, I had an inspiration. It had showered the day before, and as Frightful and I passed an old stump, I noticed that it had collected the rain. A stump, an oak stump, would be perfect, I said right out loud to that pretty bird. So I felled an oak over by the gorge, burned a hole in it, carried water to it, and put my deerskin in it. I let it steep, maybe 5 days. And steeping is like a tea bag. You just leave it in there, and all the stuff starts to come off it. I took it out and dried it. It dried stiff as a board, and I had to chew, rub, jump on it, and twist it to get it soft. Then, when this was done, however, I had my door. I hung it on pegs inside my entrance, and because it was bigger than it had to be, I cut off pieces now and then, and when I needed them, I cut off two thin strips to make jessies or leg straps for Frightful. Remember we looked at that last time. The jessies are the straps around the bird, the falcon's legs, or the hood also. Uh, I cut off all good falcons wear jessies and leashes so they can be tethered for their training. I smoked the meat I couldn't eat and stored it. I used everything I could on that animal. I never used one of its bones, or I even used one of its bones for a spearhead. I was tired of catching frogs by the jump and miss system. I made two sharp points and strapped them to the end of a long stick, on each side to make a kind of fork. It worked beautifully. Frogs were one of my favorite meals, and I found I could fix them many ways. However, I got to like frog soup fixed in this way: clean, skin, and boil until tender. Add wild onions, also water lily bulbs, and wild carrots. Thicken with acorn flour. Serve in a turtle shell. And we looked up some of those other wild food. We haven't seen these. These actually grow around here too. These are wild carrots. So, I mean, they don't look much like regular carrots, but you can clean these off and eat them, and they do kind of taste like carrots. Okay. But now my two pairs of pants were threadbare, and my three sweaters were frayed. I dreamed of a deerskin suit and watched my herd with clothes in mind. The deer for my suit did not come easily. I rigged up a figure 4 trap under the log and baited it with elderberries rolled into a ball. And this is like that trap we learned about last week with the log that falls and kills the animal. So he made a big one to try to get the deers. That was messed up. Okay, so he rolled berries into a ball. That just mushed up and didn't work. Then I remembered that deer like salt. I made a ball of hickory salt with turtle fat to hold it together. Every evening, Frightful and I, sometimes accompanied by the bear and weasel, would go to the edge of the meadow and look towards the aspen grove to see if the great log had fallen. One night, we saw 3 deer standing around it quietly, reaching towards the smell of salt. At that moment, the baron jumped on my pants leg and got my ankle with an awful nip. I guess I had grown some. My pants and socks did not meet anymore. I screamed, and the deer fled. I chased the baron home. I had the uneasy feeling that he was laughing as he darted, flipped, buckled, and disappeared. I put a picture in here just of a wild weasel. I think they're cute. So when you hear the baron, you can just imagine in your head this cute little weasel that likes to play around. The baron was hard to understand. What did he want from me? Occasionally I left him bites of turtle or venison, and although he smelled the offering, he never ate them. The catbird would get them. Most animals stick around if you feed them, but the Baron did not eat anything. Yet he seemed to like me. Gradually it occurred to me that he didn't have a mate or a family. Could he be a lonely bachelor taking up with odd company for lack of an ordinary life? Well, whatever, the Baron liked me for what I was, and I appreciated that. He was a personable little fellow. Every day I worked to train Frightful. It was a long process. I'd put her on her stump with a long leash and step back a few feet with some meat in my hand. Then I would whistle. The whistle was supposed to eventually to mean food. So I'd whistle, show her the meat, and after many false flaps, she'd finally fly to my hand. I'd pet her and feed her. She'd fly fairly well, so now I made sure that she never ate unless she flew to me first. One day at breakfast, I whistled for Frightful. I had no food. She wasn't even hungry, but she came to me anyways. I was thrilled. She had learned a whistle meant come. I looked into her steely eyes that morning and thought I saw a gentle recognition. She puffed up her feathers as she sat on my hand. I call this a feather word. It means she is content. Now each day I step farther and farther away from Frightful to make her fly greater and greater distances. One day she flew a good 50 feet, and we packed up and went gathering seeds, barks, and tubers to celebrate. I used my oldest sweater for gathering things. It was not very convenient, and each time I filled it, I mentally designed bigger and better pockets on my deerskin suit to be. The summer was wonderful. There was food in abundance, and I gathered it most of the mornings and stored it away in the afternoons. I could now see that my niches were not going to be big enough for the amount of food I would need for the winter. So I began burning out another tree. When the hickory nuts, walnuts, and acorns appeared, I was going to need a bin. You'd be surprised what a pile of nuts it takes to make one turtle shell full of nut meats. And not a snapping turtle shell either, but just a boxed turtle shell. The easy living of the summer also came a threat. Hikers and vacationers were in the woods, and more than once I pulled inside my tree, closed my deer flap door, and hid while bouncing, noisy people crossed the meadow on their way to the gorge. Apparently, the gorge was a sight for those who wanted a 4 mile hike up the mountain. One morning I heard a group arriving. I whistled for Frightful. She came promptly. We dove into the tree. It was dark inside the tree with the flap closed, and I realized that I needed a candle. I planned a lamp of a turtle shell with a deer hide wick, and as I was cutting off a piece of hide, I heard a shrill scream. The voices of the hikers became louder. I wondered if one of them had fallen into the gorge. Then I said to Frightful, "That was no cry of a human, pretty bird. I'll bet you a rabbit for dinner that our deer trap worked. And here we are, stored in a tree like a nut and unable to claim our prize." We waited and waited until I couldn't be patient any more, and I was about to put my head out the door when a man's voice said, "Look at these trees." A woman spoke. "Harold, they're huge. How old do you think they are?" 300 years old, maybe 400, said Harold. They tramped around, actually sat on the Baron's boulder, and were apparently going to have lunch when things began to happen out there, and I almost gave myself away with hysterics. And hysterics is like laughing. "Harold, what's the matter with that weasel? It's running all over this rock," a scream, a scuttering and scraping of boots on the rocks. "He's mad." That was the woman. "Watch it, Grace. He's coming at your feet." They ran. By this time, I had my hand over my mouth to keep back the laughter. I snorted and choked, but they never heard me. They were in the meadow, run right out of the forest by the fiery, barren weasel. Still laugh when I think of it. It was not until dark that Frightful and I got to the deer, and a beauty it was. The rest of June was spent smoking it, tanning it, and finally starting on my deerskin suit. I made a bone needle, cut out the pants by ripping up one pair of old city pants for a pattern. I saved my city pants and burned them a bit by bit to make charred cloth for the flint and steel. And remember, flint and steel is the thing he uses to make fire, and he burn the fabric, so he had something that was easy to start the fire with. Frightful, I said, while sewing one afternoon. She was preening her now silvery, gray, black, and white feathers. There's no end to this. We need another deer. I can't make a blouse. We didn't get another deer until fall. So with the scraps, I made big square pockets for food gathering. One hung in front of me and the other down my back. They were joined by straps. This device worked beautifully. Sometime in July, I finished my pants. They fit well, and they were the best looking pants I had ever seen. I was terribly proud of them. With pockets and good tough pants, I was willing to pack home many, many new foods to try. Daisies, the bark of a popular tree that I saw a squirrel eating, and puffballs. I put in a picture here of puffballs. These are balls. They are mushrooms, the only ones I felt were safe to eat. And even at that, I kept waiting to die the first night I ate them. I didn't, so I enjoyed them from that night on. They are wonderful. Mushrooms are dangerous, and I would not suggest that one eat them from the forest. The mushroom expert at the botanical gardens told me that. He said even he didn't eat the wild ones. So puffballs grow around here. There are these white mushrooms, but you have to be careful. A lot of white mushrooms are poisonous. There's actually ones that look pretty similar to this that are called death caps. So I would not encourage you to eat mushrooms unless you're 100% sure of what they are. And these are actually called puffballs because as they start to die and dry out, they release spores right like this that shoot into the air. And when I was a kid, I used to love stepping on these, and you step on them and they shoot out a pretty big puff of spore cloud. And they're actually kind of stinky. I used to call them stink bombs. And I used to pick them up and throw them at my brother, and he'd throw them at me, and we'd have a stinky little mushroom puff fight. Okay. The inner bark of the popular trees tasted like wheat kernels, so I dried as much as I could and powdered it into flour. It was tedious work, and in August, when the acorns were ready, I found that they made better flour and were much easier to handle. I'd bake the acorns in the fire and grind them between stones. This was tedious work, too, but now that I had a home and smoked venison and did not have to hunt for food every minute, I could do things like make flour and simply add spring water to the flour and bake this on a piece of tin. When done, I had the best pancakes ever. They were flat and hard, like I imagined Indian bread to be. I liked them and would carry the leftovers in my pockets for lunch. One fine August day, I took Frightful to the meadow. I'd been training her to the lure. That is, I now tied her meat on a piece of wood covered with hide and feathers. I'd throw it in the air, and she would swoop out of the sky and catch it. She was absolutely free during these maneuvers and would fly high into the air and hover over me like a leaf. I made sure she was very hungry before I turned her loose. I wanted her back. After a few tries, she never missed a lure. Such marksmanship thrilled me. Bird and lure would drop to the earth. I would run over, grab her jesses, and we would sit on the big boulder in the meadow while she ate. Those were nice evenings. The finest was the night I wrote this. Frightful caught her first prey. She is now a trained falcon. It was only a sparrow, but we are on our way. It happened unexpectedly. Frightful was climbing into the sky, circling and waiting for the lure when I stepped forward and scared a sparrow. So, sparrow is like a little bird. They're really common around here. They're really fast little birds. The sparrow flew across the meadow. Out of the sky came a black streak. I've never seen anything drop so fast. With a great back watering of wings, Frightful broke her fall and at the same time seized the sparrow. I took it away from her and gave her the lure. That sounds mean, but if she gets the habit of eating what she catches, she will go wild. And so I included a picture of this. This is a picture of a falcon diving. This is how they hunt. So they fly way in the air, and then when they see something, they drop down just like a missile. You see how this is aerodynamic. They shoot down like a missile, and they get going like 60 or 70 miles an hour, and they stick out their claws at the last minute, and they just basically kill animals really quick with their claws because they're going so fast and their claws go so deep. So kind of a cool thing. So I'm going to stop sharing. That is the end of the video. Please make sure you watch all the way through. Please make sure you go and take the quiz. So if you don't take the quiz and hit submit, I can't give you a grade. So don't just watch the video and not take the quiz. You can take it on the link. I'll put the link in the description of this video, but also it'll be on the Google Classroom. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.